Welcome to Inside Out, a podcast deep diving into the insights behind Equifax data. I'm Carrie Cheung, Head of Insights at Equifax. Over the past year, AI-driven threats and geopolitical tensions have continued to grow, making the cybersecurity landscape more concerning than ever. To face these challenges, Equifax doubled down on modernising our defences, pushing the boundaries to future-proof the organisation against AI impersonation tactics and kept a focus on how security can still fuel growth, innovation, and momentum. But what does any of these mean for other organisations? Sulata Bhattacharjee, Equifax's Head of Security Advisory and Risk for Australia and New Zealand, is joining me today to explore Equifax's solution to these challenges and insights that will be valuable for other organisations. Thank you for being here today, Sulata. We recently released the latest Equifax Security Annual Report. Can you tell me a little bit more about that report and how it came about and the history of it?
Sure, Carrie. Thanks so much for having me today and for allowing me to share my thoughts. So the Security Annual Report was something that we started 5 years ago, and we're still one of the few global organisations who still do this today. And so it was really born out of our foundational belief that the rising tide lifts all boats. It's something that our CISO/CTO, Jamil Farshi, always says, and it's born out of the belief that transparency, collaboration, and continuous improvement is fundamental to living in a world with good cybersecurity. Yeah. And so as an organization, we fundamentally want to be a leader in security. And I think this report demonstrates and showcases those leadership qualities. And so we very actively share our learnings with our industry peers to help organizations uplift their own security posture, but also to encourage organizations to share their learnings with us and other organizations so we can benefit as an industry as a whole. So in terms of Equifax, we are a global organization. We operate in over 24 countries around the world. And so from a security perspective, we are managing an incredibly large footprint from a threat perspective. So since 2018, we have invested over $1.5 billion in our security and technology transformation. Yeah. And our global CISO, Jamil Farshi, as I mentioned, is also the strategic advisor to the FBI. And so he has been really focused on that public-private partnership. Yeah. And so I think it positions us very well to share our insights with other organizations. So cybersecurity is not homogenous. If you ask 20 cyber professionals what their opinion is on a particular topic, you'll get 20 different answers. But as a security professional, I read a number of papers, I need to read a number of reports. And I think this report is just another fantastic resource for organizations to test their own thinking and learn what other organizations are doing in this domain. And so our significant investment as well over the last 7 years, as well as our engagement with the industry, I think really helps us bring some valuable insights to the table in this sphere.
Definitely. Like thinking about the scale of investment in this space, and there must have been a lot of thinking about how it's done and what needs to be done, and sharing that would be very valuable for the industry. And I've seen you in so many different panels, and it's always a hot contended topic. So what are some of the key trends that we are seeing that Australian organisations should be taking note of?
So I really encourage everyone who's listening to this podcast to grab a copy of the Security Annual Report, go through it in their own time. It is available on the equifax.com website. As I mentioned, it's a fantastic resource for them to sense check their own security roadmap. And the report covers a number of different things. It primarily covers what we've done over the last 12 months in terms of our own security program and some of the key programs of work that we have implemented in 2024. But it also talks about what we're anticipating for the future in terms of supply chain risk and AI-driven threats, which are really hot topics at the moment. Yes. But I think more importantly, it showcases the mindset of a security-conscious organisation. And so personally, I've been with Equifax for over 3 years. I can definitely say that we test the boundaries in terms of security. Yes. And so we talk about our security culture how security is everybody's responsibility at Equifax. We talk about the maturity of our cybersecurity program, how we have outperformed all major industry benchmarks. We also talk about our security posture score, how that is exceeding industry averages across technology and financial services. And so for me, from the report, it's really evident that we operate a robust security framework and that security is really embedded in our DNA. So I think it's a fantastic blueprint for other organizations in terms of what they should be thinking about in terms of their own security program. So I just wanted to delve into some of my thoughts, which I think really can be summarized into 4 key areas, which I think deserve further commentary. The first aspect for me is that the threat landscape is obviously evolving. I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anybody that we're living in an unprecedented time.
There's something new every day.
Exactly. And so we are living in a state of heightened cyber risk. And so there are a number of factors that are contributing to that. One of them is definitely the acceleration and expansion of the digital sphere. If you think about it, we have more and more services coming online. We have more and more devices coming online. Even your fridge and your washing machine can be connected, let alone your mobile devices and your tablets. So that is contributing to an ever-expanding attack surface, which then becomes increasingly complex to manage. The other thing that we're seeing, obviously, is an increasingly hostile threat landscape that is going to be greatly exacerbated by these AI-driven attacks. We're only just seeing that in their infancy at the moment. So we're really at the start of the crest of the wave in terms of what's to come. And so we, as you mentioned, it's also being exacerbated by this increasing geopolitical tensions that we're seeing in a number of regions around the world. So in the report, we talk about what we're seeing from a threat perspective, how we defend against 15 million, over 15 million threats a day. So that is
A day. Across the global,
Equifax network. So that is nearly 175 hostile attempts per second, and that is a 25% increase from last year. Now, if you think about what I've just said about being at the start of the crest of the wave for AI-driven attacks, we are going to see that potentially exponentially increase over the coming years. And I don't think anybody can really anticipate where we're going to go because it's just moving so fast at the moment. So now is a really great time for organizations to revisit their security strategies and really think about whether they are well positioned to defend against these emerging threats. So in terms of our own response to these growing threats, so we have doubled down on our AI-driven enhancements, and that has resulted, and what I mean by that is we are building in AI into our security controls, and so that is paying dividends across a number of our security controls. And so the first would be an acceleration of our penetration tests, our application security reviews, and also our log analysis for improved threat detection, which is really important in the cyber world. So whilst we are, again, at the start of the crest of the wave in terms of the AI-driven attacks, we also have an amazing opportunity to utilize AI for defensive purposes. And so we've got a fantastic opportunity, an equally exciting opportunity there to utilize AI in the correct way to protect against these types of attacks. So the second thing I wanted to talk about from the report, we deep dive into our passwordless authentication or our transition to passwordless authentication, how this mitigates against compromised credentials. And so we're really proud of this. This is something that we started back in 2023, where we recognized that compromised credentials are really one of 2 leading initial attack vectors for cyber attacks. Now, depending on which statistic you reference, it has been reported that up to 81% of cyber breaches start with compromised credentials, either reused, weak, or stolen passwords.
Wow, that's the majority. It comes back to that password.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So the other leading vector is vulnerability being exploited, but that is much more difficult than using a stolen password. It's basically like getting a finding a key to a house and opening the house, right? And so we would argue that the remaining 19% are probably also caught up in this compromised password or compromised credential attack vector, because you need to typically escalate your privileges to move laterally within the organization. And so compromised credentials are a really big and, in my view, underrated attack vector, and something that organizations should really be focused on in terms of eliminating that risk. So we've been on a mission to eliminate that risk since 2023, and last year we implemented our transition to passwordless, which is fantastic. So we moved our entire workforce, or global workforce of 22,000 employee and contractors, to passwordless authentication for 300 internal applications. A huge effort,
Yes.
but one which our global CISO again has been on record for saying is the greatest risk buy down that we have implemented through a single program in the 7 years of his tenure at Equifax. So amazing risk buy down from that program. So as I mentioned, Equifax is always pushing the boundaries. We actually partnered with a vendor who were developing a technology in the formative stages of the development of that technology, which enabled us to build in new feature sets into that new technology, including new IVR verification, which is really for service desk calls, which has really enabled us to future-proof this capability. And now that capability is available to the rest of the industry, which is fantastic. So not only has this move improved our risk buy down, it has also brought about a number of benefits from a business perspective. So from my own experience now, I can seamlessly log onto my laptop when I'm trying to log onto the network. I don't have to remember a password. I can just click on my authenticator app and authenticate onto the network, which is fantastic. That has then resulted in fewer calls to the help desk for password resets, which is driving down our help desk cost. And it's also improved our workforce productivity metrics because people can log onto the network seamlessly. So it is a great example of how security and business enablement can go hand in hand, and also how we're thinking differently about controls implementation, that those two things are not mutually exclusive, that we can buy down risk as well as benefit the business, which is fantastic. So that's a nice segue into the third aspect for me, which is that security and innovation are not mutually exclusive. So in 2024 alone, across the Equifax network, we launched over 100 new product innovations, or what we refer to as MPIs internally. And so I think this is important because historically security has been seen as a blocker, it's been seen as slowing down the business, and our metrics just don't reflect that reality. We are working hand in glove with our product and technology teams, and we are delivering secure products to the market at a rapid rate. So I think that's a great key takeaway for organizations to have as well. And finally, this is not explicitly called out in the report, but I think the report really highlights that we are a cost-conscious security function. And I'm hearing a lot in the industry now about security professionals having to demonstrate their ROI on security activities and really speak the language of the business in terms of financial benefits for security activities. And so in the report, we talk about how we've had year-on-year 6% cost reductions in operating our security assurance programs. So this is obtaining our security certifications. So that resulted in a $500,000 US dollar saving across the board. So we managed 51 certifications across the Equifax network. And we also, again, talked about reducing help desk costs through the implementation of the passwordless program. So again, I think it's a really important conversation, one that I'm hearing more about in Australia as well, in terms of how do we demonstrate that ROI, how do we respond to the financial pressures of the business, and again, it showcases how organisations can use our learnings to demonstrate that in their own environments.
Definitely, it's not just security on its own, but it has to work with the business, and how does it bring benefits to the business from the great security and as an investment overall. So that's really good.
And I think as well that we are operating in the context of the business. We are here to support the business.
Yes.
Security is not a blank check, even though it is really important to maintaining the security of the business and making sure that it is still a viable going concern. But at the end of the day, we have to be cost conscious.
Yeah.
We still
And I
work in
think
that
it's kind of the mindset that we operate in. Whilst we try to innovate and build new things, security is just baked in. It's part of the conversation. It's part of the build right from the start go.
100%. 100%.
So are there any final thoughts that you'd like our audience to know about?
I do want to leave our audience with a concept, which would probably be a relatively new concept to them, which is that of data as a service. And I think it's a concept that's not really getting as much airtime as it should be, particularly in Australia. And so, what do I mean by data as a service? So, for me, the conversation around cybersecurity starts before we start talking about cybersecurity.
Yeah.
It starts with data.
Yes.
And so if we think back to the large data breaches in Australia in 2022, one of the overarching criticisms was around this perception of there being a massive over-retention of data in those organizations, which then subsequently led to more individuals being caught up in that data breach than otherwise was necessary.
Yeah.
Now, I can't comment on whether there was an over-retention of data or not. There's a number of reasons why organizations hold data. They could be compelled to from a regulatory perspective. They may be holding it for litigation purposes to future-proof them from future litigation. But there's no question that holding vast amounts of data exponentially increases our risk or exponentially increases the impact if we were to fall victim to a cyber attack. And it also makes us an attractive target to cyber adversaries. So what we want to encourage organizations to do is start thinking differently about how we're holding data and how we meet those external pressures and external regulatory requirements whilst de-risking our environment. And so this is where data as a service comes in. It's really moving us from a data collection model to a data consumption model. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, rather than holding every single piece of information that we need to hold, we then consume certain pieces of potentially high-risk information from data verification services, such as Equifax or other organizations, to prevent that risk sitting with us.
Yes.
So a great example of that would be a real estate agency. They are required to hold income and identity verification information for a particular tenant. Say, for example, that could come in the form of a driver's license or a payslip. But as a real estate agent, do I really want to be holding that kind of sensitive information? What I could do instead is obtain that verification information from a data verification exchange, such as Equifax's workforce solution, where I can verify the income of that individual without obtaining their payslip, say, for example. And so just by virtue of the fact of doing that, I have de-risked my environment and I only hold the information that I need to hold. That is relatively benign if I get breached. So this concept can be, a real estate agent, typically a small business, doesn't have the level of investment in security as it would from a banking client or, a larger organization. But this can really extend to any business. So say, for example, if a bank wanted to de-risk an environment, they didn't want to hold pay slips for lending verification or something like that. They could also use the same concept from that perspective. Fantastic for organizations such as brokers, but really good for small business where, again, the level of investment in security is probably not as available to them as other large organizations, and a fantastic way to de-risk your organization and mitigate the impact of a cyber attack. So just something for people to think about in terms of how can we shift the dial rather than just uplifting our security controls and making it more difficult to breach our organizations, how do we actually de-risk our organizations and move that risk somewhere else? So something for our audience to think about.
Yeah, definitely, especially for our smaller businesses, like you said, that don't have the huge amount of investment in these spaces. The other approach is to risk it. You look at options to reassess whether the data is really needed and rethink, what sort of information they should be holding to. And if you don't need it, don't hold on to it.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. The report sounds like a really good resource for a lot of the organizations out there. So we'll provide that link for our audience today. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks so much.